careful, Teresa. That elite was an ultra.
This is going to be a bit of a shocker. Maybe it will make you angry, but that's the point. We want to get some rage out of you. So, gay marriage in the temple, it can and will happen, and in your lifetime. Under your nose, under your watch, that's when it's going to happen. It's just going to happen, okay? And that is the attitude that we all need to accept, and the reality that we need to accept if we're going to do anything to prevent it, because the enemies of the church, they see it as a real possibility, and they're working to get it done. And they have their spies and in the trees or whatever working against us, whispering in our children's ear through little dog cartoons or whatever, slowly planting the seeds, because the prophets are mortal men, and they will eventually die, and they will need to be replaced from someone who is among the membership of the church. And the younger that you get, the more acceptance of certain ideas that we have, and this is just a problem. And it really comes down to how the church is politically neutral, which I think is a problem. I think that we should be there should be like some sort of explicit political framework, because Mormonism, our faith, it is a theory of everything. And we need to be able to interact with all sorts of ideas. And currently, we don't even have an approved adjective to describe our own culture, our own art, or books that are in a particular genre. Like, we do not have an approved adjective for that. And I think that this is a problem. We need a set of tools, a set of language and ideas, and a whole framework where we can effect God's will on the world, because the restoration is not just a spiritual movement, it is also a political one, because everything is political. And God restored His church, but He also restored His kingdom. And His kingdom was the Council of 50, which there are many groups who claim to be the true successors of the Council of 50, which I find their claims doubtful. But it is a reality that God's kingdom is not just a spiritual kingdom, it is a political one, and its existence has always been political. Your existence is political. That breath you're taking right now is a political breath. If you're a straight white religious male in 2024, that's political, just to exist. So, why is it a problem that the church is politically neutral? It is a problem because there's this guy named Robert Conquest, and he had his laws of politics. He said the following. He said, rule number 1, everyone is conservative about what he knows best. Rule number 2, any organization not explicitly right-wing sooner or later becomes left-wing. And number 3, the simplest way to explain the behavior of any bureaucratic organization is to assume that it is controlled by a cabal of its enemies. We see a lot of these faithful members of the church who seem to be getting discouraged, and they are starting to believe, I guess they're starting to explain certain behavior of the church by adopting number 3. But mostly I wanted to focus on number 2, that by being politically neutral in a world that is constantly sliding left, we will slide left. And this is why we need to have the attitude of recognizing these problems and being willing to put our shoulder to the wheel, in a sense, and have the prophets back, because I believe that if we have the prophets back, God will listen to us. It is our attitude. The prophet doesn't really represent us. He represents God. If we all collectively have the attitude of, we want to live the higher laws, we want to have your back. Moses, we are sorry. We're sorry we're worshiping this golden calf, but pick those pieces up of the broken tablets and go fix them. We will live it. I think that God responds very well to this type of attitude, and we've seen it over and over again. And I think that once we acknowledge certain realities, certain problems, and we commit ourselves more fully to doing what is right and stepping up to the plate, I think that the prophet will respond. And we've started to see this a little bit. There's been a lot of outcry with some of these high-profile, controversial baptisms, high-profile, controversial members, all the teachings at BYU, and there's a lot of people complaining about that who are faithful members, and they're very upset about it. I think that the brethren have heard us, And they have tried to accommodate that. And you can see it in the handbook changes that have been slightly more favorable to what is good and sane. And there is now a campaign at Brigham Young, at BYU, that everyone is talking about to be more strict about the hiring and the loyalty of the employees, which I think is very good. This is a point in our favor. And I'm not talking about, oh, I want the church to be my political vehicle for my political candidate or whatever, because, oh, Donald Trump, he's the greatest ever. You know, Donald Trump is pretty cool, but he consistently surrounds himself by traitors and not good people who hate us. So I don't know why we should continue to trust him, because he's not loyal to the American people, or at least he doesn't seem to make an effort to surround himself with anyone who is. Anyway, so it's not about that. It is about what is right and good. And we, as members of the church, we know what's right and good, and we can stand up for right and good. And when we have the prophet's back, he'll respond. And I think when we have these correct attitudes about doing what is right and going the distance and making the sacrifice and standing up, like through the sacrifice of Abinadi, he was willing to go testify before the king and say the truth. He converted the high priest Alma, who had the priesthood. Many people were affected by that because of Abinadi. So we need to have this attitude of being willing to go the distance. Anyway, there's this cool meme. It's a little spooky, I guess, and it's mostly seen in like a Fed posting context, and that's not what I'm talking about. I like the attitude that it inspires. So it says, "What is faith, son of man? Is it faith to be patient while the serpent consumes God's creation? To find comfort in slavery, knowing your inaction will be rewarded? That should you obey Satan long enough, God will save you? Or is it faith to risk your soul to do what is right? That if you leap into hell to fight for God, his love will save you? Will you forsake comfort in servitude to charge into hell? Do you have enough faith in God's love for your immortal soul to do what must be done?" And I think God responds very well to humility and to hard work and to just willingness to shoulder our burdens. We see this over and over in the scriptures. I really like, I think it's Helaman 11, that God curses the people through the prophet with a famine to end the fighting, right? Because they have arguments about doctrine, right? Which go to bloodshed, right? They have arguments about doctrine that go to bloodshed, and then the prophet prays for a famine, and the people become humbled, and they ask the prophet to save them. And then and only then does the prophet end the famine, and once the famine is ended, he is able to resolve the doctrinal questions of the people. But it's only after they have basically humbled themselves and offered this sacrifice of a total willingness to do what is necessary. And so we see many times in the scriptures that God is totally willing to let all hell break loose if it's going to make his children more humble. And good examples of this are in the restoration, that God was willing to let us lose the first half of the Book of Mormon. You know, Mosiah 3 is the first chapter of the Book of Mormon that we have. That's why Mosiah does not have an intro, is because it was lost. Mosiah 1 and 2 were lost, and now Mosiah 3 is now Mosiah 1. And that's a huge tragedy, and it was allowed to happen. Nauvoo was basically sacked. Kirtland. And it's not Kirkland, okay? It's not Kirkland like Costco. It's Kirtland, the Kirtland Temple, not the Kirkland Temple, okay? You got to get that straight. We can't be saying Kirkland Temple, because it's not the Costco Temple, okay? Makes us look ridiculous. Anyway, so these horrible things are allowed to happen. The saints were driven across the desert to Utah. The Edmunds-Tucker Act happened. People were put in prison for following the commandments of the Lord, simply for living in a biblical style, if you want to call it that. And I think that the early saints, they understood politics a lot better. They were able to separate the politics of the church and the doctrine of the church a little bit better in their head. Like, they were able to understand what's a political maneuver and what's doctrine, because a lot of these policy changes, handbook changes, statements, these are all political maneuvers, and a lot of people think that they're like doctrine. And if we look at the church's first big public political maneuver, which is Official Declaration 1, I think we can learn a lot about the kind of attitude that we need to have surrounding all this stuff. We can't be flying off the handle. We have to stay calm and cool and collected, and we have to never compromise on what's right and wrong and what we know to be true, and just be willing to do what it takes to get what we need, because we know what we need, okay? It's not that complicated. Anyway, Official Declaration 1. There's this really just juicy italics in the front of the Official Declaration 1, which is just full of these... It's no wonder that we're all confused, because it says, the Bible and the Book of Mormon teach that monogamy is God's standard for marriage, unless he declares otherwise. And I'm not aware where it says that. They cite 2 Samuel 12, and it doesn't say that there. I don't understand how that could be saying that. And then there's Jacob 2, which is very, very commonly said to be God's standard is monogamy, unless there's an exception. And I don't think that's what Jacob is saying at all. We've lost the context of the first half of the Book of Mormon, and I think that Jacob is saying that the Nephites practice polygamy, and that they're abusing it. And because of these abuses, it's being taken away. It's their 1890 manifesto. And that didn't mean that polygamy was over forever, because Amulek, later in the Book of Mormon, is a polygamist. Or, Ether, not Ether, but in the Book of Ether, there's a polygamist Jaredite king, too. And the whole Christ has many brides. He's got the church, and the church who's his bride in Europe. He's got a church who's his bride in America, church who's his bride, us, the Church in the Latter Days. That's definitely a polygamous teaching as well. So there's a lot of polygamy there in that Book of Mormon of ours that's subtle, and maybe it even went over Joseph Smith's head. You never know. So anyway, back to the Official Declaration 1. It says, to whom it may concern. It says, I, therefore, as President of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, do hereby, in the most solemn manner, declare that these charges are false. Like, he doesn't say, thus saith the Lord. He doesn't say, as a prophet of God, which is all very interesting. It's not the language that the saints probably would have been familiar with. And then he also says, I now publicly declare that my advice to the Latter-day Saints, advice, really, is to refrain from contracting any marriage forbidden by the law of the land. Mexico, Canada, right? I think it's obvious what's going on. And don't take this the wrong way. I'm not saying to go run off into the woods and cheat on your wife and enter into all sorts of unsanctioned unions, okay? That is not what I'm saying. That's a bad idea. I think that if you are excited to live the law of polygamy, God will pick you up like a bug and squash you, because you need to be prepared for that. And if you're excited, multiple wives. If you're excited by the prospect of being surrounded by multiple women constantly, there's something wrong with you as a man. Let's just say that. What a true man craves is male-only spaces where we can plot and be leaders and strategize how to save the world and how to make the world a better place, where we can invent things. That's what a true man craves, okay? If you're craving multiple wives, you got to get your head checked, okay? We might need to send you to BYU for some electroshock therapy. There might be something wrong with you. But jokes aside, polygamy, it is something that you have to accept in your heart. It has to be something that you're willing to live. I think that much is critical. And currently, we aren't called to live it. But I think that if we have the right attitude, there's no telling what God could ask us to do. If we're a people who is willing to do as commanded, exactly, with exactness, and not get distracted, there is no telling what God, through his prophets, will command us to do. I think we might be surprised. So that's the attitude that we need to have. We need to have the attitude and the humility of failure is possible, and I will do what it takes to prevent that from happening. Those are your thoughts for today. I think that we need to really just have a better attitude. I think we're just noise. Go on Twitter, all the LDX or whatever they call it. It's just noise, and we really need to get coordinated here. the prophet's not as based and red-pilled as me. Wah. Grow up. Of course he's not. He's like 100 years old. In some senses, you would think that would mean he's like very old-fashioned, but the guy likes to get flowers on his birthday and play Chopin, and that's great. You know, he's a nice grandpa. You know, so don't be shocked when Elder Uchtdorf is not on the same page as you, considering he got like brainwashed by all the post-World War II propaganda in Europe. Okay, so not trying to throw shade, but just be real. These are real people, okay? And we can be critical if we're careful. We have to be careful. I don't want to be disrespectful, but it's okay if they're not Jesus Christ incarnated. We talk a lot about how the prophet isn't fallible, but then if he ever does anything that is minorly upsetting, we all fly off the handle, and it's okay. It's okay. They're God's chosen people, and they're not the president of the United States. They don't represent us as the body of the church. They represent God, and they're accountable to him, okay? So, and I think they're doing a good job, and I think they do respond to, they will respond to a deep change in but in the church's culture and attitude. I think that there will be a response to that. So, anyway, that's your message for today. Stay faithful. Hang in there. Have a good one.